Hello everyone, my name is Nilanjan Chatterjee. Welcome to the Universal Group of Institutions. Today we are going to discuss a very important part of Indian history, particularly the history of modern India. While talking about the history of modern India, we often overlook some of the major movements of modern India directed by the people of India against the colonizers or the Britishers. So today we are going to highlight some of those very crucial movements directed by the people of India against the colonizers or the Britishers. And today's discussion is the Faraizi Movement of 19th century. So we will be coming with these new kinds of topics in our channel. Please follow our channel and subscribe to it. If you have not watched our previous videos, please check our YouTube channel and don't forget to like, share. So let's come to today's discussion. We'll be talking about the Faraizi movement of 19th century, which is on one hand a religious reform, on the other hand agrarian assertion and proto-political consciousness in colonial Bengal. Why am I calling it all these things? Let's discuss. As we can see in the very first slide, a century of dislocation. Now this is a very important thing to remember, a century of dislocation. Why? Because the 19th century in Bengal was a period of profound dislocation shaped by colonial political dominance, agrarian exploitation and religious fragmentation. Why agrarian exploitation? Because we all know that in the year of 1793, the permanent settlement was introduced in Bengal, which actually impoverished the rural economy and particularly the agrarian communities. So, the permanent settlement of 1793 under Lord Cornwallis created a new landlord class. On one hand, we are experiencing an impoverished agrarian society or community. On the other hand, we see the emergence of a landlord class. Because of the permanent settlement, we see the emergence of the zamindars. So, the zamindars became the legal proprietors of land, particularly after the permanent settlement, while actual cultivators were relegated to rent-paying tenants. It's a very important word. Rent-paying tenants without any form of political or economic security. Why? Because the landlords are enjoying maximum power and they are trying to exploit the peasants. They are trying to take away all the revenues by exploiting the peasants in a terrible fashion. So this new order initiated by the permanent settlement bred deep economic insecurity amongst the rural Muslim peasantry of eastern Bengal, who faced double marginalization. Why double marginalization? That is a very important question. The first marginalization is by the Hindu-dominated zamindari system, because majority of the zamindars were basically Hindus. On the other hand, the second by internal decay within the Muslim community. So, the second point is also very important, that is the internal decay of within the Muslim community itself, fractured by superstition, syncretic practices and social stagnation. So, we see on one hand a protestation against permanent settlement or the zamindari system initiated by the Britishers, directed by the people or the Muslim peasants of Bengal. On the other hand, we see the second or the other face or other side of the story. That is, we see a purification of the Muslims of Bengal, particularly the peasant class. That they should get out of the superstitions and the barriers of prejudices. So, as we can see in the next slide, the birth of a movement within this socio-religious and economic milieu. Why do I call it socio-religious? Because on one hand, it is trying to solve an economic problem, that is permanent settlement. On the other hand, it is also trying to address some religious problems which are basically deeply rooted in the Islamic communities of Bengal. Okay, so it is on one hand socio-religious, on the other hand economic. Okay, the Faraizi movement emerged as one of the most significant Islamic revivalist and peasant movements in South Asia. Founded by Haji Shariatullah, please don't forget the name, Haji Shariatullah, and later consolidated by his son Dudu Miyan. The movement derived its name from the Arabic term Faraiz, okay? That means the obligatory duties of Islam. This is also a very important information. The obligatory duties of Islam. Okay, so Faraizi movement on one hand is a weapon to challenge the zamindars, who are basically vectors of the colonial permanent settlement. On the other hand, it is also a weapon to bring back the purest form of Islam and to preach Islam in a very pure way amongst the Muslim population of rural Bengal. So it is on one hand an economic and political reform, on the other hand a socio-religious reform, and also to some extent a cultural reform as well. So the movement's central thrust was the purification of Muslim society. So we should identify ourselves as purely Islamic individuals, okay? Only then we can or we will get the legitimacy to fight the Britishers or the colonial regime, okay? Through strict observance of Faraiz. I have already told you the meaning of Faraiz, that is the obligatory duties of Islam, and the rejection of bidat. Now, what is bidat? Do you know what is the meaning of bidat? Bidat is basically un-Islamic innovations. That means something that has already been created by God. You are trying to mock the creation of God. That is called bidat. Okay, that is un-Islamic innovation. Something that is already created by God. You are trying to mock the very creation of God. Okay, that is called bidat. And under Dudu Miyan's leadership, the Faraizi movement evolved into a comprehensive socio-economic and quasi-political mobilization that challenged the structural inequalities of colonial Bengal, particularly in the rural spaces. Okay, I think it is clear so far. Let's come to the next slide, a remarkable evolution. Let's look at the timeline of the Faraizi movement. We'll get into the details. Let's talk about the first phase, that is from 1781 to 1840. It is also called the phase of theological purification. Theological purification, that means purifying the inner domain of Islam, particularly amongst agrarian communities, in agrarian society. Okay, so Haji Shariatullah, one of the pioneers of the Faraizi movement, establishes doctrinal foundations and religious reforms. The first very important method to unify the Muslim people of rural Bengal, okay, by giving them one purely codified text or purely codified knowledge about Islam. Okay, that is the first phase of the Faraizi movement from late 18th to early 19th century, 1781 to 1840. Now comes the next phase, that is from 1840 to 1862, which is also called the phase of socio-political consolidation. Why socio-political consolidation? Simple. Dudu Miyan, okay, the disciple and son of Haji Shariatullah, transforms the movement into organized agrarian resistance. It is no longer just a socio-religious movement, it is also a political as well as economic movement against the domination of the zamindari class or the Britishers, who are basically empowering the zamindars, entitling the zamindars. Now comes the third phase, that is from 1862 to 1947, that is institutional entrenchment. Saiduddin Ahmad and Rashiduddin, these two people maintained organizational structure of the Faraizi movement. Faraizi movement got an institutional form during this phase, particularly in the late colonial period. We call it late colonial period, early 20th century. And finally, post-independence, that is post-1947, we see political accommodation. What is political accommodation? Movement adapts to Pakistan's creation as Darul Islam. So, Faraizi movement, which was apparently a socio-religious movement gradually took a economic and political shape, actually got involved in the movement for the freedom of Pakistan later on. So, that is a very interesting journey. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about the problems of this journey as well. Let's look at the movement very neutrally, because we are students of history. So, this is our first important slide, that is on the pioneer of the Faraizi movement, that is Haji Shariatullah, the founder. Born in 1781 in Shamail village, Faridpur district, which is currently located in Bangladesh, Haji Shariatullah travelled to Mecca. Okay, Haji Shariatullah travelled to Mecca around 1799. Spreading nearly 2 decades, imbibing Islamic scholarship and reformist teachings influenced by Arabian Mujaddid circles, particularly those resonant with Wahhabi and Mujahideen movements. So, he went to Mecca and learned the purest form of Islam. And once he came back to India, he realized that whatever brand of Islam or brands of Islam is followed in India, they are not purely Islamic in nature. So it is a moral responsibility of a person like Haji Shariatullah to fix the moral impurities within Islam. So he started propagating the purest traditions of Islam in the form of Faraizi. He prolonged exposure to, this is a very important term, that is Tawhid. Tawhid means monotheism, a belief in one God. Okay? Monotheism and Tajdid, that is renewal, shaped his conviction that Bengali Muslims had strayed from pristine Islamic tenets. So, he had this complaint that Bengali Muslim community, particularly the agrarian class, they have deviated from the purest form of Islam. So it is his responsibility to fix these things with the help of 2 things. What is Tawheed? Okay, that is monotheism. Because Bengali Muslim community was closely associated with the local Hindus, so a lot of syncretic traditions emerged before 18th century. He came to purify all this syncretism, and he propagated the notion of Tawheed, that is monotheism, and Tajdid, that is a renewal of the purest Islamic values. I think it is clear. So, returning to Bengal around 1818, he was deeply distressed by the degeneration of Islamic faith, marked by syncretic participation in Hindu festival, saint veneration, and neglect of the Faraiz, obligations of Islam. Because I have already told you, the rural Muslim community, since they were very closely attached to the Hindus, their practices, their customs, their belief system, they got actually merged with the Hindu belief systems and practices and philosophies. So Haji Shariatullah felt the necessity to change it and bring back the purest form of Islam with the obligation or Faraiz. Now, the 5 pillars of Faraizi doctrine. One is Tawbah, that is the repentance for past sins as means of purifying the souls. First of all, you have to realize that you have committed sin. Only then you can get the legitimacy to purify yourself. Okay, so that is the first point. The second one is the Faraiz observance. What is the Faraiz observance? Strict adherence to obligatory religious duties. Okay, the Faraiz obligation. Then Tawheed, I've already mentioned. What is Tawheed? Uncompromising affirmation of God's unity. Okay, that is, the God is united to all the living and non-living creatures because the God is single and shapeless as well as formless. So, the monotheistic idea of definition or notion of God. Then, another very important point, that is the Dar-ul-Harb. Okay, the Dar-ul-Harb, that is the declaration of India as the land of war under non-Islamic rule. Most accurately, one can call it the land of the infidels, okay, the land of the non-believers, the land of the impure. Okay, that means Haji Shariatullah had this vision of changing the rural population or the rural communities of Bengal or India in a larger aspect from Dar-ul-Harb, land of impurity, to Dar-ul-Islam, land of purity and Islam as well. So, the next point, the final point, is rejection of bidat. I've already told you the meaning of bidat. Denunciation of all non-Quranic customs as sinful innovations. Why? Because customs, particularly those which are non-Quranic, basically try to mock, according to Islam, according to the Faraizi brand of Islam, they seem to mock the innovations or the creations of God. So that is why it is called sinful innovations. And Haji Shariatullah spoke against bidat and another thing called shirk. Okay? Shirk, which means polytheism. Okay? Worshipping multiple gods and goddesses. So these were the things questioned by Haji Shariatullah. Okay? So this typically socio-religious movement took a very different turn in the 19th century. What happened? It is basically because of Dudu Miyan and his politicization of the Faraizi movement. It changed its course. So as we can see in this slide, the young leader I have mentioned here, the young leader whose name is Dudu Miyan, quickly became notorious for his willingness to engage in violent civil disturbance, okay, in response to any oppression. Oppression coming from the zamindars, okay. So suddenly you can see what happened to be a socio-religious movement purifying with the venture of purifying Islam suddenly became an economic movement directed against the Hindu zamindars, okay. Particularly two zamindars, the Sikhdars of Kanaipur and the Ghoshes of Faridpur, were known not just for illegal taxes but specifically targeting the Faraizis. Okay, so the Faraizi believers were targeted by the Hindu zamindars, and how they used to penalize the Faraizis? By imposing extra additional illegal taxes on them. And there was one person from the Faraizi community who stood up, who was the son of Haji Shariatullah and whose name was Dudu Miyan. We can consult the colonial records right below, as we can see on the screen. Here on the left side we see two landlord families, the Sikhdars and the Ghoshes, in a bid to halt the advancing Faraizi influence. The spelling of Faraizi is deeply colonial influenced, resorting to banning cow slaughter on their estates, collecting levies for Durga and Kali festivals, and dissuading the peasants from joining the movement. Dudu Miyan organized two successful expeditions, one against the Sikhdars of Kanaipur in 1841 and the other one against the Ghoshes of Faridpur in 1842. These anti-landlord campaigns enhanced his popularity amongst the downtrodden peasants and laborers, especially in the districts of Bakharganj, Faridpur, Dhaka, Maimansingh, Pabna, Noakhali, Tripura and parts of Jessore. Okay. Seeking protection from the landlords, the panic-stricken and tyrannized Muslim peasantry joined Faraizi ranks. Okay? According to a police report, the followers and supporters of Dudu Miyan numbered in East Bengal alone between 55,000 to 80,000. Can you believe? I am just citing from the colonial records. Which means Dudu Miyan collected this much popular support with the help of his economic and political agenda against the Hindu zamindars. So what happened to be initially a socio-religious movement, he is giving it a politico-economic shape okay, a politico-economic shape against the oppression of the zamindars. As we can see on the other source that I have highlighted here, by his easy victory over the Shikdar, Dudu Miyan led another campaign against the Ghosh family Faridpur. We see multiple references to Dudu Miyan's activism against the zamindars. How Dudu Miyan is revolting against the zamindars of Eastern Bengal. Okay, and remember another thing. These zamindars are basically recruited and supported, powered by the colonizers. So they are the spokesperson of not the colonizers but the colonial economic system. Okay, permanent settlement to be precise. So in the right side also you can see evidences of how Faraizis were penalized by the zamindars, they were pressurized, oppressed by the zamindars, and how with the help of Dudu Miyan they fought the zamindars back. So this is our next slide. That is opposition and economic defiance. Okay. On one hand, we'll talk about the theological resistance. Okay. The first point is theological resistance. Haji Shariatullah's ideas provoked vehement opposition from orthodox ulama, especially Maulana Keramat Ali Jaunpuri, who accused him of Kharijite tendencies, okay, claiming his rejection of congregational prayers would fragment Muslim unity. So, Haji Shariatullah, the father of Dudu Miyan, when he started spreading awareness about Islam amongst the local population, actually the main opposition came from the Islamic community itself. Okay, why? Because the local Maulavis and the Maulanas, they started feeling insecure about the growth of Faraizi section or the Faraizi sect. And that is why they were afraid of the Faraizis. Because the Faraizis claimed that if you have the knowledge to study Arabic or the language in which the Holy Quran is written, you can read and interpret Quran on your own. You don't have to go to a Maulavi for the ultimate interpretation of the Quran. Okay? You can read Quran and understand, interpret, internalize Quran on your own with the help of the Faraizis. Because the Faraizis will teach you how to be educated in an Islamic way. Okay? So that the local Maulavis can't take an advantage of your ignorance and basically teach you something inappropriate. So the second point is the economic revolution. Haji Shariatullah's denunciation of zamindari exactions was revolutionary. He declared landlords creatures of the permanent settlement. It's a very important terminology. Creatures of the permanent settlement had no legitimate right to peasant produce beyond legal rent fixed by the state. But you know what happened? Since permanent settlement basically enabled the zamindars, they were collecting taxes, particularly abwabs, and used to impose them on the Muslim peasants. For example, taxes based on the celebration or taxes for the celebration of certain festivals, Hindu festivals, to be imposed on the Muslims. So these are extra charges imposed on the Muslims which made the popular lives of the Muslim people miserable. He forbade participation in Hindu puja festivals, payment of arbitrary crop levies and recognition of zamindars as moral authorities. Okay, so we'll be talking about the rest of this movement in our next video. Please stay tuned and keep watching our channel, keep watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, vote this up so that YouTube knows you're enjoying what you're watching. We'll be coming with the next episode of the Faraizi Movement. See you in the next one. Peace out.